well, we are very small today, and I think maybe we could just, if you're able in a place where you could be on video for talking, great. If not, I understand. I'm sometimes not myself, but just since we're so small, right at this hour at least, perhaps just we can introduce ourselves. The purpose of today was, just to have a roundtable discussion, and that was to kind of talk about ESSER funding use. I think the CDC announcement today and its impact on schools is worth discussing. My partner here, being a board member of a large district, can provide some light on what they're doing and the different conversations about, some of the policy implications of today's announcement, I think would be worth discussing. And then what we're going to do for the next several weeks here is focus. Our team internally is outlined a report of the last year's worth of webinars. And what we're going to be doing is reaching out to all of our previous speakers, including you, Joe, and seeing, okay, so here's what we have as a synopsis of your presentation to us. And then what do you have to add now, then looking back on your presentation, just a few paragraphs of your advice to school districts relative to the topics you discussed, and act as editors in that sense, and stitching it all together so that we have a leave behind. So we're going to take at least a couple weeks off and really focus on getting that document drafted and reaching out to our speakers so that, our aim is that, by early to midsummer, we'll have a deliverable that digitally focused that can be out there for folks to use as per intent of this last 6 months, to help shape and craft guidance at their school district or state, to whatever degree the content can be useful. So this is kind of a quick meeting. We just decided, let's just have this now, just to have a quick touch base on sort of, as these funds are starting to come in, and I hear clients starting to apply for the use of ESSER 3. Just kind of wanted to get a sense on what people are thinking, what people are doing, and have that more of a group sharing here amongst you all that are in the weeds on the work. So Susan, did you want to add anything to some of what we're looking at in terms of the deliverable, or any additional feedback we need right now?
No, I think, we were talking about the 3 specific categories, the social emotional health, which was that one side of the community for the students, but the big parts of the operations, what it's going to look like for our healthy buildings and the impact related to those changes that are going to have to take place. So those are kind of our, the touch points for students, but the touch points for the facility side. So that's kind of, I think, the gist of where we're trying to get to. Okay.
Well, with that, I think we'll have a couple other folks that are emailing me saying, hey, I don't have the link. So we should have a few other people joining us, but let's just start. I mean, maybe Joe, do you want to start, and just what are you hearing, from the state level there about ESSER 3? Are those funds now on their way to the districts? How are they getting to your districts? What's the lay of the land in terms of that funding right now?
Yeah, we're still releasing ESSER 2 funds, and we're working on ESSER 3. And what we're seeing is that that money is really creating a lot of opportunity for, robust additional educational resources focused primarily on learning outcomes, right? That's what we're seeing the biggest focus, and that could be because in Rhode Island, like I said at the beginning, we we've seen a tenfold increase in school construction. As you know, we were in tough shape there in 2015 and rebounded, and we've put about a third of a dent into our need. And so at this junction in time, we are we have a robust school construction program. We are seeing some serious amount of additional education funding coming our way. I mean, just this past fall, we were all concerned that we were going to, lay off tons of teachers, and I mean, it was pretty dramatic. And now where we are today, with the CDC, it seems like we're in the roaring 20s, or at the beginning of it. But I guess the lesson that I've come to realize is that, more so than ever before, school architecture matters in a significant way. And now, as we see some of this funding, it may not go directly to school construction, but it's going to other things. But we have a robust school construction program. So I think all in all this money going into education allows us all to, not cry poverty as we've been for decades and decades. And now we have some tools that we can focus on student outcomes with, particularly the social emotional, but also getting back some of the lost learning.
Yeah. And so, with a lot of the funds targeted on the operational and academic side of the house, are there any particular statewide guidance or discussion about capital use of those dollars, or is it kind of a free-for-all right now?
We just our board. So for those of you who may not know, I work at the Rhode Island Department of Education, the school building authority there. And last night, our Council of Elementary and Secondary Education actually were outlining some processes for ESSA and the like. Now, remember, a lot of that is tied with federal strings. I mean, there's a lot more reporting now than in the ESSA 2 had less reporting than we have to do now. So I think, but the focus we're seeing is to try to, for us, rebuild Providence public schools and start to get the learning outcomes we at least get to a national metric. We've been we're much lower than the rest of the country for certain students in Providence. So this money is allowing us to do, and you may know that the state took over the city schools. So it gives us a lot more flexibility, a lot more tools in the tool chest to implement really some significant district administration overhaul, really work on programming that better serves those marginalized communities. So it's really, we're just at the beginning of the ESSA 3 discussion.
Got it. Mike, where is Georgia in this discussion right now? ESSA 2, 3, and capital guidance versus not in terms of these funds?
Interestingly enough, I was just looking at this. Our state board on our website is actually seeking public comment to get some ideas from the public about what they think this money should be spent for, which I think that's interesting. It's almost as if I really wanted to say, why didn't I think of that? But I think that I think that will be interesting to see what parents and even some older students will be able to give some feedback as to what they feel like their needs are. On the capital side, for those of you who don't know, I'm the Assistant Director for Facility Services at the Georgia Department of Education. I also want to mention that Dr. Joe Peters is on the call. I noticed he popped in. And Joe is our Dean of the College of Education at Georgia College and State University, which is just about 15 or 20 miles down the road from where I live. And I'm a proud alumni, by the way, of that institution. And I serve on their Joe's advisory board. So I had invited him earlier. I'm happy he was able to attend. But Georgia has a fairly robust, has had a fairly robust capital commitment to school construction and capital maintenance, particularly roof and HVAC replacement, as far as extensive renovation activities. To the extent that the legislature sets aside $300 million every year that we divide among school systems based on need, and that's been in place since the 1980s. So, so we've always had, and in the last 25 years or so, we've added to that. The local school district has the option of imposing a special purpose local option sales tax on itself, on its county, in order to go toward the local money that's necessary to get to the state funds for these capital projects. But I talked to a couple of school districts who have recognized the opportunity to use some of these funds, particularly for HVAC replacement, to either do some of those projects in total, which would free up their state funds for other needs that they have, or to be the local portion of funds they need to leverage to get to the state funds for the projects that are in their local facility plan. So, and I'm gonna say this at the risk of sounding, at the risk of it not sounding good, but I do think that we're scrambling a little bit. You know, this, it's almost like for the first time in a long time, we've got more money than we know what to do with. And so I say that in the most wholesome sense. So it's created these conversations about, I mean, really good conversations about, okay, what do we do with that money? And so I think the point I wanted to make, really, to bring it full circle, is the capital program in Georgia for assisting districts has a mechanism that I think will allow school systems to take some of this money and leverage it as the local portion they need to complete some of these projects. So it's certainly not the wild, wild west, but I know there's a lot of conversation about where best to use this money.
And, you know, Mike, Joe, and others, Amy, from the state perspective and local districts here represented, and David, from what you're hearing from ASBO, curious with this funding and, you know, targeting HVAC and you know, related. I'm just curious about the secondary systems that are implied in air quality and how folks are thinking about that. You know, I have a particular, you know, client that is thinking about this, their ESSER 3, as thinking about the big four, as they're calling it, you know, roofs, windows, doors, and HVAC, which, you know, it's hard to argue that you can have indoor air quality, you know, good indoor air quality, if you're having mold because your roof is leaking and the windows are leaking and so forth. So one of the questions is I'd like to toss out is that an isolated event? Are you hearing others making that case and plans for ESSER funds, especially ESSER 3? And then third, has there been any discussion that you're hearing about, or your thoughts that you might have on the potential of these investments going into buildings that really in the next 10 years need to go? One of the concerns I would have is that where you have some of the most acute HVAC needs and air quality needs are at buildings that once you take those those units out and start, replacing it, you're in diminishing return, with that building itself.
So I'll take first stab at that. Let me start with throwing good money after bad. Part of our planning process in our state helps districts. Well, it really incentivizes a district to leave those buildings once they're at the end of their life expectancy. And what I mean by that is the combination of state assistance that you can get to replace an obsolete building, along with the sales tax dollars that you can generate, and the mobilization of local will to replace an aging school, particularly in smaller communities where they're going to get one shot at this over most people's lifetime.
Right.
And now this opportunity to leverage federal dollars along with that. I think I'm not nearly as concerned about school systems using that money with a theory for with an eye for throwing good money after bad. I think we have, I wouldn't call it oversight, but because I can't think of a better word, I'll call it oversight. Mm-hmm. We have some oversight at the state level with respect to the way we engage districts in the planning process, that I think we can stiff arm that if it were to become a problem.
Got it.
David, and the only thing I would add to that is that obviously your team helped us create FCI indexes for all our buildings, so we know which ones are obsolete, and so it's very easy for us to control renovations to obsolete buildings and just make them, emergency kind of, right, the buildings need to be safe, but we limit renovations to emergency issues, and the FCI metric is one way we can do that very easily.
Right, makes sense. Amy, from your vantage point and state of New Hampshire, again, global's perspective, and then as for others, like what are you hearing on these topics about standard plans for ESSER 3 and some of these potential, misapplications we're talking about?
Yeah, I apologize for being late because this is something I wish I was here from the first part of the conversation, only because well, first of all, I guess I'll preface by saying the funds are not being managed through facilities, so at our state, so it's hard for me to really, I might have a biased opinion, and that's probably not fair, especially to our administrator who's probably working very hard, but I will just preface by saying that, and then I'll give you what I really think. What I really think is that schools are not, in New Hampshire, are probably not taking advantage of this money whatsoever. And it's been a complicated process. I think it's unclear to our state what is eligible and what is not eligible. I think some states may be approving roofs. I don't even know if our state is approving roofs. I don't think our facility folks know what is approvable and what's not. I think we're trying to make sure that we manage the funds properly, and it seems to be that it's a case by case, and schools are just not getting the answers, and money has to be spent quickly. And what I hear from schools are, if we need to do this, we need to know now. And it just seems like, especially for ESSER 2, that they're just not able to spend those funds because they're not able to get an answer on whether things are eligible or not. And I don't know if it's because we're a small state. We have one person managing our fund and getting answers from USDOE. I don't know if that's an issue. I don't know if it's the way we interpret I don't know if it's because that's not a facility person. So when somebody applies for something, they don't know facilities. So there's that. And I think ARP is going to be probably the same way. So yeah, I'm kind of, and to also, for those folks who haven't heard me complain about this already, the state of New Hampshire has been in a moratorium on state building aid for over 10 years now. So we haven't really built any new schools with the exception of maybe 4 construction projects in the last 10 years with state aid. And so that just means that our affluent schools are moving forward with their local tax dollars, and our less affluent communities are not doing anything with their schools, and our school buildings are getting worse and worse, like lots of people can probably relate to on this call. So when I saw these ESSER funds, I'm thinking, what an opportunity. We finally get to do something facility wise, especially for some of these needy schools. And of course, their ESSER funds are greater. So it's really an opportunity for some of our poor districts. But now my bubble has been popped. So that's, I guess that's my take. I don't know if other people can relate or not, but that's ESSER. I just don't see facilities being a big take in New Hampshire.
Confusion. That's what I underlined. Yeah, and this is, I do not and will not forget, your comment sometime last year about, the schools without any HVAC systems that, trying to navigate back in the early stages. What do we do?
Right.
Seems like the candidate for these funds.
Right. Oh, yeah, absolutely. And I'm wondering if it's because ESSER is so broad versus saying very specifically what schools could apply for. I don't know if that would have helped, but because the language is so broad that it seems to leave too much for us to interpret. And depending if you're working for a program who wants to support facilities versus they don't care about facilities, it might be different. I don't know.
Somebody else have similar issues or some resources that, I know I'm going to do my homework, but some resources that might be helpful there for Amy in New Hampshire?
I don't know that I have resources for Amy, but I'm in Oregon, Southern Oregon specifically, and we are planning to use our ESSER 2 and then the American Rescue Plan dollars for facility improvements, starting with HVAC. We have schools that don't have HVAC that are still on old boilers, and not only, with COVID and communicable disease an issue, but we all have wildfires down here. And so, we have like 4 seasons here, or 5, one of them is wildfire season. And so that's a big issue for us because you can't deal with COVID and communicable disease stuff when you're trying to keep smoke out of the buildings and keep the building open for the kids to come in. So we're definitely investing some of the money into HVAC. We've looked at windows, we've looked at doors, we're looking at roofs because we have the issue with the leaking roofs and the issues that come with that. We're also looking at covered outdoor spaces, which we could use for meal times as well as outdoor learning spaces. I'm going out there on a limb with looking at our middle schools upgrading the tracks and the fields, because right now they're not really usable because we have pretty significant drainage issues, and so we can't use those areas right now for potentially outdoor like PE or other learning spaces. So looking at upgrading our fields, and our tracks right now are just granite tracks. They're not all weather at all. And so looking at some of those things. And then the other thing we're looking at is, because part of the money, or one of the criteria for using the money, is equitable, providing an equitable spaces for all students. And so looking at renovating some of our restroom areas or adding additional gender neutral restroom areas. So we're looking at a lot of facility stuff over here.
Sherry, where are you going to kind of get your guidance on your planning efforts there and in your planning projects?
Our Department of Ed, our state Department of Ed.
Okay. And is that, are you having meetings with them? I'm just curious, are they publishing documents of guidance? Are you just, is it more verbal meetings? Like, how's that guidance being transmitted to you?
They have provided some written guidance to us, and they're working on a form that we'll submit for each of the projects that we want to do. And so we'll tell the what of the project and then the why of the project, and then how we feel that it qualifies for whichever of the ESSER funds that we're looking at, whether it's the ESSER 2 or the American Rescue Plan dollars.
Got it. Is that something that we could access, that written guidance? Is that something we can access ourselves? And okay, that's right there. Okay.
If you go on to the Oregon Department of Ed website, I don't remember which one it's called. You'd have to look it up. It's either under ESSER, or I don't think it's under American Rescue Plan. But they've got the guidance. There's some guidance there. And so it gives the acceptable uses. And then there's a document that compares ESSER 1, ESSER 2, and American Rescue Plan, what was allowed in each one of them and what the differences are.
There it is. I'm going to put that in the chat. Great, thank you.
Yep.
And where, anybody else want to share some of the hiccups or similar stories about ESSER fund plans right now, or confusion or anything of that nature? David?
Hey, David, I'd just sort of jump in there. We have heard a lot, just sort of, anecdotally and kind of from everyone everywhere, the issue of kind of lack of clarity, and I think in school districts, it's just so much, if you tell us what to do, we know what to do. If you don't tell us exactly what to do, it gets into a problem sometimes with like, well, it's okay to do it. So we've been basically kind of saying in a broad sense that if it's facilities, if it's something that needs to be done that's going to help address like the learning loss, that type of thing, then it's allowable. Now, I'm not sure, like, it's different for each state, what needs to get approved and all that type of thing. So I'm not sure, like with Amy's specific example as to who you need to justify that to is different, all across the country. But basically that's been, like with AASA and with us, kind of our guidance as to, what we can and can't use. We're like, if you can say we needed to do this because, and it's like, okay, well, we needed to put in HVAC, right? You can't have the kids in the building if it's not safe there, and that's a necessary thing. I also wanted to point out that, we did our survey back in March, well, there was kind of 7 major uses that they were planning, and this is just ESSER 1 and ESSER 2. Hadn't come out yet, or that wasn't part of the survey. But number 1, providing intervention and remediation for students to address learning loss, and also mental health and social emotional care services. Number 2 is connectivity broadband, for the homework gap issue as far as technology. And I think this is all changing a bit in the sense that now that vaccines are becoming so much more prevalent, I think by the time we start looking in the fall, for people to be coming back, there's going to be a lot more in-person learning, hopefully going on. And that I think is going to shift a lot of that to, okay, well, what then do we have for facilities? And then number 3 is repairing, upgrading, and maintaining school facilities. So that, from our survey of school business managers across the country, facilities is right up there at the top as to, first we got to figure out, how to address the learning loss. The second one is technology, and the third is facilities. Those are what we're planning on using the funds for. And I think it's one of those situations, kind of, ask for forgiveness is at this point, it's a lot better than asking for permission, because you may, especially if you're just not getting any answer at all, then just say, okay, well, I guess it's approved, so that's easy enough for me to say. I'm not sure, what type of restrictions are in place in certain states, what sort of processes are there. And there is a tremendous amount of scrutiny and looking at making sure that we're spending the money properly. That's obviously one of the main things that, purchasing people, business officer, that's just in our DNA is, we're going to get audited. So we got to make sure we're doing this the right way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
On the flip side, though, there could be states out there, some shall remain unnamed, that if they're not looking to promote facilities, or like if their gig isn't facilities, then it's easy for them. I'm trying to word this appropriately. It's almost like we need ammunition for the schools to say, yes, this is eligible. Department of Education, you have to fund this because it's allowable, versus making the case like, oh, well, this could cause mold and therefore, we need to have good air quality. Or so, for example, like somebody could say, well, we need an HVAC system. We need to replace our HVAC system because it's old, and that will help combat COVID. It's a COVID response. It's a COVID relief fund. Therefore, it's COVID related. But then the state could come back and say, well, that system was already old. You should have been updating it already. That's your responsibility to update it. So that's not really COVID relief. That's something you should already be doing. And I think that those gray areas might not be gray to some states, but they might be gray to some other states, especially if they're just not. Somebody could say, well, you don't meet the current ASHRAE standards. You don't need to meet the current ASHRAE standards because those are like standards that are required when you mess with the system. Like when you're already grandfathered into the old standards, so you're already in compliance. And then other issues that could happen are when people start messing with the building, now they have to become ADA compliant. They have to do all of these other things to bring their building up to code because now they're doing construction. Well, is that also eligible expenses? Well, I don't know. I can argue the way I've been told in meetings that I could argue for facilities all day long. And I think it's easy because obviously it should be covered. That's what I always say, but it's not so obvious to everybody. And so if schools could come in with documentation by the feds to be like, this is clearly eligible, it certainly would help make their case to a state that might not be as eligible friendly as some of us might be.
Interesting, Amy. And just having deja vu moments to last year when we were talking about like, well, what does a COVID capacity look like, back in those days, right? And what's the standard of care? What's the basic standard of care? What are people doing? Oh, it was 6 feet. Okay, so let's model on 6 feet, and so that was, and I'm, sensing the standard of care here will be crucial, and it will be, I don't like to use this word much, but organic, in the sense that it's just going to be what people are, to sort of the preponderance of folks are doing, because it's going to be the lot of the spending. It will be on that, and it will come in a variety of ways. So for better or for worse, I sense litigation in our national future when it comes to figuring this out. Sometimes, I just seems to be how it's happened in the past.
Yeah, that's nothing. That's nothing new, though. So
Exactly.
that's the way we do things here.
Exactly.
It's you.
But okay, well, so having some standards, clearly ESSER 3 spells out 3 different categories of explicit facility use, and we can find those and pop them in the chat here. But that does need to be communicated out. Other folks, from a district level, I see some of the familiar faces here from a district level. Can you tell us a little bit about what your current plans are for ESSER funds and how, what are your current capital related plans for that? I don't know, Bonnie, Thomas, somebody want to jump in on that? Cindy?
I don't have anything currently, David.
Oh, okay. Okay. Cindy, what are you sensing there in Texas?
Yeah, so good afternoon. In the state of Texas, it was just about 3 weeks ago that the Texas Education Agency even notified districts what their allotment of ESSER 3 funds were. And so those conversations are just starting. There are a number of districts, business folks that are weighing in on a discussion board at the moment about what they're thinking about. And we're hearing everything from internet towers to technology, to HVAC improvements, buses, school buses with air conditioning is something that some folks are interested in. Renovating library spaces and creating more flexible type of opportunities for kids to have small group discussions and interventions, those types of things. But the state is just now, there's even one tomorrow, they're just now hosting some training, some virtual training to even educate districts on what they can do with these funds. So you do have to get public input, and then you have to apply for the funds. So we're on the very early end of that.
So do you have to get public input? That's part of the stipulation.
Yes, and I thought that was a federal requirement, that maybe just Texas, or just at the state level, but
it's federal. It's all states.
Yeah, that's kind of what I thought, but and there's a requirement that you've got to have some pretty extensive communication out to your public in the form of just information that is presented about opportunities to come and hear about the plans. You're posting your plans online and letting people comment, giving various avenues for people to have input is something that is being required here.
Yeah, and that's a little bit different than the previous rounds of funding. And I think we'll make it a little bit more interesting for districts. How do you solicit input and the value add? Some may say we want all of our buildings to have HEPA, or we want all of our buildings to have ultraviolet. We want, how do you prioritize? And that's going to be a challenge, I think. And some people are saying, well, I know for our district, we're just starting to talk about going out to community partners initially. And how do you define community? Like somebody said earlier, students and parents, and they may want something that we can't afford. So that's going to be kind of we're getting all this money, but we're kind of hand stripped or controlled by what we can do with it. So the wish list might be something that we can't do.
Cindy.
That's a good point. And here in Texas, the ESSER 3 money is the first round of CARES Act funding that has come directly to school districts with any latitude on how to use it. ESSER 1 and ESSER 2, the state used to supplant their funding for the state foundation school program, which is our basic state funding formula.
And Texas does not have, forgive me if I should know this if I'm wrong, be embarrassing, but Texas doesn't have any kind of like statewide facility investment program like matching grants. You,
Correct. The only thing that they've done is provide some funding to lower wealth school districts to help repay bonded debt. It's a matching requirement, it's a guaranteed yield formula, and so there aren't many districts that even qualify for it anymore.
so it's not like in Rhode Island where you have the SBA that has a matching formula for school districts based on a poverty index, and that's, you know, that's how they do capital. So that, I'm going back to kind of Amy, you know, one of your comments earlier, and you know, Texas being, you know, roughly analogous from a facility side, it'll be really interesting to get the transcript, if that's available, of some of these hearings that TEA is putting on with LEAs to talk about allowable use. That might be something, Amy, that could be a benchmark.
Yeah, it could be. Analogous probably in our funding. But I think another thing, New Hampshire, I don't know, maybe this is just me whining today, but we also only have one person that administers this fund. So because we're a small state, so it's just one person doing all of the work. And I realize our work is so much smaller than most states. So right. I understand that, but it's still that one person that kind of has to be an expert on all of the pieces of ESSER. And because they don't have a facility background, I think it just makes it more difficult. With that said, our state has about, we have about 450 public schools. So again, I'm not crying tears here, but just that one person I think has a lot on their plate.
A lot. Susan, what are what from, your vantage point there in Colorado, what are you seeing, hearing, either at your district or elsewhere?
Well, I know the state is trying to put together some guidelines in terms of how we can measure the effectiveness of certain investments that we're making. So Katie Anthus, who is our commissioner of ed, so to speak, she's part of the Chiefs for Change. And I think I sent over that document, David, last week. Yeah, Chiefs for Change published a big document to help with guidance. And I know she and her team are using a part of that potentially. They're trying to, I think, get something together to be able to provide to districts for the ESSER 3 in particular, how to be using it and measuring it, which I think would be helpful for the public to see how we're investing our dollars and what we're getting for it. And I know we're being very judicious in how we are trying to spend dollars even within our district now, and being able to potentially shift some of that grant money over. That gives us a little bit more flexibility. So for example, we have funding that we're doing right now for certain purchases of technology and or that we've already started to do anyway. So we can apply for ESSER 2, not 3 yet, ESSER 2. We can apply for approval for the ESSER 2 dollars. And if that's already been kind of in our budget, we can get approval for the payment of those investments. And then the shift can go over into a little bit more, our general fund has a little bit more flexibility in what it can use the extra dollars for. So we're kind of trying to move the money through the buckets that gives us the greatest flexibility. ESSER 3 is going to be a different ball game, just because we are going to have more proof of value add, so to speak, with the investments that are being made.
Have you heard anything specific being proposed where you are there in Jeffco?
We are now just starting our going back to school investments. And so the individual that is heading that up actually is Dr. Leach, David. So
okay.
That would be, she's starting to come back and ask questions of what we know. So yeah, I think it's trying to figure out how we are investing our dollars. We have a big capital improvement program too, like what Joe was talking about, and Jeffco's doing a lot of upgrades to a lot of our buildings. But we're still trying to figure out what we're going to have to do for when we all go back to school. Are we talking HEPAs in the classrooms? Are we talking other types of interventions for cleaning the air more effectively? We're still trying to figure out, do we have to go back with masks or not, depending on what the CDC said. So there's a lot. And then if we don't have to pay for masks anymore, then, what are we having to, if we can divert money away from PPE, what do we use that money for? So there's a lot of moving pieces, so to speak. And we're just, and as the CDC changes, and then Colorado Department of Health and Environment changes, we're going to be shifting money around, I think, depending on what they tell us we have to do.
Right. Thinking about David's comment with ASBO, and I'll post the full report link PDF right now if somebody wants to download that. But PPE being, and technology being some of those initial out of the chute expenditures, right? Those certainly seem to have the quickest drop off. Like a lot of that has been done, particularly with, as with anything in this pandemic, the guidance that came out in the last 20 minutes or so about, masks indoors, not needing that indoors for folks who've been vaccinated. You can certainly see that budget item dropping off, David, right? And then sort of, it seems like just that facility is just bubbling up.
Yep.
And I have to think that that's going to be a clamoring over that now. And that will be, HVAC is the new masks, I think, starting in the fall. I don't know. What are you sensing?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. As you look at the checklist items of what was priority number one is changing with the guidance. And to Cindy's point too, that was very much on the mind in that survey, is the supplanting issue, that they weren't supposed to be able to do that. And I think, from what I understand, Texas has been particularly egregious about just saying, well, we're going to do it anyways. And they took the money and they took it away from you, and then they gave it back to you. They just supplanted it, and that was it. So hopefully with ARP, that won't be as much of an issue. But what you then end up doing, with those funds does the indoor environment start to, as you say, bubble up more to the top, that this is going to be the most prevalent. And I'm hearing a lot of, which technology actually works. And now we're hearing, well, maybe some of these things that are claiming to be better for the air. Well, no, actually that's, you're actually hurting the indoor air quality. So I hope a whole lot of districts haven't invested a lot of money in things that have now coming out to look like, well, that was not a good direction to go in.
Yeah. And that's just stuck out in the myriad of conversations we've had on this topic. The fundamental basics of ventilation trumps filtration. Fresh air if you can.
Yeah.
But you can't. And when you filter, if you caught Martin Bazant's couple webinars on filtration and particulate removal, MERV 13 is fantastic, but a good amount of ventilation with a MERV 8 does a really good job. It really does. And getting that fresh air flush is crucial. And then, Dr. Shaughnessy's comments on, the portable air cleaners. Not many people have written a book on it, but he did a long time ago. And it was, what's tried and true is HEPA. This other stuff he was hesitant to speak too bluntly, but these other things are not so tried and true. should we say? Yeah, money, right. And it goes, to the concern of, like Jeff Vincent kept saying it early on, and others, but the concern of hygiene theater, right? That, right, we would be engaged in that, and being flush with cash without clear direction and good salespeople is certainly a recipe for such things. For that, but yeah, ventilation. So, and Sherry, I had to note and call out your outdoor learning spaces. I've heard a little bit of that, not a whole lot, but the idea of baking in some outdoor learning spaces to use as capacity, as a way to have that fresh air environment. Is that specifically in order to to address the fresh air needs, and if you have an outbreak you can teach outdoors, or was that more programmatic, let's supplement a program? What's the thinking there?
So in our state, we have the Ready School Safe Learners guidance that Oregon Department of Ed put out. And one of the things that they call out in there is one of the strategies that they wanted us to look at was creating outdoor learning spaces. So that, and mainly for the airflow kind of, get kids outside, keep them 6 feet apart. Your chances of spreading COVID theoretically are less, if you're outside and, having that good natural airflow. So that is what really spurred us to start thinking more about, how could we create some outdoor learning spaces? And so we have a lot of older schools in our district, and in one of our middle schools, which is the enrollment there is about 825 students. There's only one outdoor area where they can even eat, and it's not covered. And so they have the cafeteria, and that's the only option. And the cafeteria isn't really big enough for the number of kids that flow through there every day. And so just not in a COVID year, but in a normal year when it's rainy, which we're in Oregon, so yes, it rains a lot here. The kids are pretty much under the breezeway that goes between the buildings. And so that middle school has a main building, and then it has like 2 wings off of either side of it that are not connected, but they do have breezeways. And so you can go by there on any lunch hour and see, 150 kids all squashed together under a breezeway trying to stay out of the rain. And so having some covered spaces where kids can actually eat outside, where, all of the guidance we've seen, whether it's through the CDC or, just our local health authority, if you can get the kids outside, it's a much better environment for them than being stuck in a classroom or putting them all in a cafeteria. So that's where the thinking for us came from as far as looking at additional outdoor learning spaces, specifically because it was called out in the guidance that we have gotten from our state that we have to abide by.
Interesting. Yeah, and I called that out in part because outdoor learning spaces, you're not Southern California. It's not 75 degrees all year. Right? You have some weather up there, but that your point is actually that's part of the benefits is one of the giving some shelter on top of the outdoor learning. That's interesting. Okay.
So Sherry, is that something that you're planning on using these funds? This will be new construction, something that you're gonna build outdoor learning spaces, or?
Yeah, it's basically, so it'll be part of like the playground areas at the middle or elementary schools. And then at the middle schools, we have 2 areas that are conducive to that now, where kids kind of congregate outside when it's not raining. Even if it's cold outside, our kids are pretty resilient. And so they play outside, even if it's, 40 degrees out there. But when it's raining, that's not conducive because you don't want the kids coming back in soaking wet. And so we have a couple of areas that we would essentially be, erecting the structures that would cover that area. And one of our elementary schools already has a covered area that's off the gym. And so there's a couple of basketball hoops underneath there, and there's room where you can put additional, picnic tables or folding tables if we needed to use it for an outdoor eating space, or if a teacher wanted to go outside and do some kind of a science lesson outside, it's a covered area where they could do that. Or if they wanted to take a group outside just to read outside or do art, it provides a space where they're out of the weather.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah.
Well, I appreciate everybody's participation and thoughts today. Before we close, was there somebody else who has a particular story about ESSER funding plans or question or concern that they wanted to bring up? Okay. Well, have the notes here, and just kind of the summary is what we've been hearing, similar what we're hearing from outside this call, but that HVAC is number one, but it's not exclusive. There's a lot of creative related capital plans related to indoor air quality. And I say that with sincerity and not tongue in cheek, but no, seriously creative, like on the outdoor learning, the double, triple bottom line thing, windows, doors, roofs. It's not just, related to HVACs. The track and fields as a part of an outdoor learning, that's a new one, but I see the tie-in. It's all that we have to keep kids outside. And the fact that your state guidance there in Oregon speaks to that specifically is something interesting. I'm glad you pointed that out. The Texas's, guidance on allowable use, I think sounds really applicable to those states without a program. I think that'll be really good to get out. And much like we were in a situation, a year ago with disparate and changing guidance coming from states and feds, we're kind of back at that right now, only about how do we use these monies. And I guess it's a good problem in a way, but there will be problems. So see what we can do to work with Mary and others on digesting, synthesizing, and getting out some guidance on the guidance kind of thing. So stay tuned. All right. Well, I guess that'll wrap us for today. Everybody, thanks for your feedback and questions, comments. Do check out, if you missed last week's presentation with Dr. Steiner at Johns Hopkins. It was outstanding. Last year, of course, he did a great presentation on acceleration versus remediation in academic interventions. And what was really helpful we found last week was tying in the facilities design part of that and what the facility, some of the facility implications are that we have to think about moving forward when we talk about acceleration and personalization. So anyway, I commend you to it. If you haven't seen it, have a great rest of your week. And we will send out an invite. We're probably going to take at least a couple of weeks off. I'll send out a notice here when we have that buttoned up so we can work on our reporting to summarize the last year and get something actionable to you all for your purposes. So have a great evening. Good to see everybody. Bye-bye.